topic, which was,
Okay.
we are by there.
Okay, we are live now. I think we are live now. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us once again in our series targeted at school leaders. Our series is entitled COVID-19, The Shift in Teaching and Learning, What Next for the School Leader. Our aim in this series is to support school leaders as they lead their schools and lead the teaching and learning process in a time of crisis. And we also aim to support them in a time where they have to deal with change by creating this platform where head teachers can share experiences, can share best practice and learnings. Last week, we looked at the well-being of head teachers in different aspects of their lives, their personal well-being, their professional well-being, and we also talked about professional well-being. Our aim this morning is to shift a little and look at the aspect of change. It has been said that change is the only constant. And in this season, head teachers and teachers have had to look for transitional learning approaches and bridging the gap as we move into the future. We hope that this session will be able to help you to prepare, even as you prepare for schools to open. This morning, I am joined by a panel of educationists. As we are talking about change, we've had technical issues that we are all learning through, and some of our panelists will be able to join us as we go along. So this morning, with me already is Abdi Ishmael. We have a guest from across the border from Kenya. Abdi is a head teacher. He is also a facilitator with the British Council on our Connecting Classrooms program. I also have with me Mr. Abi Mbiru, who is also a head teacher and a facilitator on our Connecting Classrooms program. Welcome and good morning, gentlemen. Would you like
good morning.
Please go ahead.
Good morning, Shinji.
Good morning, and thank you.
Good morning, moderator, and good morning, the audience.
Thank you. We will hopefully be joined later by Dr. Kedres, who is the Director of Education Standards in the Ministry of Education and Sports. We are also hoping that Alfred Okello, a head teacher and facilitator for the British Council Connecting Classrooms program, will also join us as we start the conversation. So last week, as I mentioned earlier, we looked at the overall well-being of the head teacher. Schools are still closed, and there are a lot of uncertainties as we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the key question is, how are school leaders positioned to manage these uncertainties? And how are they positioned to provide leadership to the different stakeholders? That's the teachers, the parents, management during this period. The focus of this discussion today deals with managing change in this season. So before we continue with the conversation, I would just like to invite Mr. Abi Mbiru to share with us his experience so far on managing change. Just 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Shinji, our moderator. Thank you very much, our audience who have been able to join in. Good morning once again. Change, like Shingi has alluded to, is a constant. We go through change every other day. Like you can imagine, even naturally, we change our clothes, we change our looks, we change our hairstyle. So this is something that we must learn to live with. But in some cases, changes are so extreme that they cause us to panic and sometimes to imagine that that is the end of the road. So my experience is that whatever change comes, all you need to do is to understand it, adjust to it, and find a way of moving forward. Because every storm that comes, actually, at the end of the day, it clears. Thank you for now. I think that will do. Back to you, Shingi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mobero, for that. You are saying change is the constant and we have to adjust. Abby, how are you feeling about the change and your experience in Kenya?
I think whoever does not want to change will change them. So we have no option when it comes to issues of changing. And when you decide to fight against change, and in this case, we are talking of a change that we could not way to try and
I think we may be having connectivity issues. We hope that it will settle soon. And these are practical examples of the changes that we are having to go through in this
is a challenge to us.
Sorry, Abdi. Let's just give him a minute and see if we can get him back. Abdi, welcome back. We lost you a bit, and these are the realities of the season. Please go ahead, Abdi.
Sure, that is part of the change we are talking about.
Yes, that is part of the change.
It's part of the change in a funny way.
Absolutely. Practical learning.
Sure. So I think change management is a very important thing for us. It is something that we have to learn to work with. Right now, we are being pushed towards use of technology to solve some of the changes that we are facing and challenges that we are facing. So it will force us to try and learn it in a different way. And I think the most important thing is first to accept that we need to change. And once we accept, then we can come up with our own ways of dealing with the change. So we just need to get buy-in from the various people we are working with. We need to involve them and communicate that now we have this change and we will need to work around it. So that is basically what I'll want to say about the change. I don't want to go into specific examples, but that is the general observation I have. Back to you, Shingi.
Thank you very much, Abdi, for that insight and the statement that whoever does not want to change will just still come upon them. I think you have already touched on a number of issues that head teachers will have to deal with in this season. And I think the key one that I've picked up from you this morning is that of communication, the role of the head teacher as a communicator. As head teachers, practicing head teachers, how has this been for you? May you share with us your practical experience where you have had to deal with yourself as a good communicator, an effective communicator in a season where you have to use technology and you have to manage stakeholders, your teachers, your pupils, parents, ministries of education, district offices. I would like to invite the two of you to share your experiences and that role as a communicator and the challenges and as well as what has been working. Mr. Mobiru, would you like to go first?
Thank you very much, Shingi, and thank you for the opportunity. First and foremost, we need to recognize that COVID-19 pandemic is a real crisis. It is a global health crisis, and the changes or the situations it poses are way beyond what was expected when you think about the normal change. So in recognition of that, we also need to know that our calling, which is education, is to the children, is a fundamental human right to the children. And when it is a fundamental human right, in whatever circumstances, it must be provided for. We must protect it. So whether, like we said last week, that even when the schools were closed, learning did not stop. It has to continue. So even in times of crisis, education remains a fundamental human right. So having that at the back of our minds, it puts us in a situation where we must not live thinking about the education of the children. By the way, in addition to that, there are other crises that can come out of not providing education. So while we are managing COVID-19, which we know at one point in time, we shall either learn to live with it or it will go, the effects of not having our children continuing with education can be adverse in the future. And therefore, as school leaders, as systems, as policymakers, when a crisis like this one comes up, we must find a way of providing education. UNESCO and UNICEF and the rest of the countries or systems that have had crises. Some crises are war, natural disaster. There are many things that have happened to people that have brought a risk to education. So in times of crisis, therefore, every system, every country, every educator should begin to think about a plan that is going to take you through that crisis, a transitional education plan that is going to take you through that crisis. In Uganda here, government has made strides towards that. Everybody knows that we have gone into homeschooling. Individual schools try to manage the schooling of the children. The country at large tries to manage that. But now this transition must be structured. It should be actually structured, knowing that the highly vulnerable people are those that actually need the intervention. So how do we invest in the transition? We must think critically and look at the critical needs. What is the critical need of education? What do we want to look at now as school leaders, as government? What is our concern about our children who are out of school? Is it to have their mindset still poised and make them think about education even when they are out of school? Now, if that is it, how are we investing in that? If we must reach them, with educational materials. We are talking e-learning, we are talking homeschooling, we are talking radio, we are talking television. How have we ensured that the most remote area has been reached, and whose responsibility is it? So this is why at this point in time, the school leader becomes a critical stakeholder. Because this school leader, it is presumed, and I would like to imagine it is true, knows their students and they know how challenged they are. And therefore, if this critical stakeholder, the school leader, is brought into the loop, or if he himself, I'm sorry, I'm using he because I'm a he, but if the school leader begins to know that they have a critical role to play to continue education, even when there is this crisis, then they must be properly positioned and strategically positioned to be of help. So this conversation about what could be done, about where we put our investment, about putting a transitional educational plan in place, ensure that the critical education needs are met within this critical time, within this time of crisis, is very important for our future. So I think in Uganda we are doing well in as far as most of these things are concerned, but I need to acknowledge the fact that the challenges are enormous. May I stop there now for now? Shinji?
Thank you very much for those insights, Mr. Mubiro. You've mentioned that being an educator is actually a calling, and that it's a fundamental human right for children to have education, to access education, and that every system needs to think about a plan, a transitional plan in this season on how to continue with education. One of the key messages that you have communicated is the critical need to think about what the main concern is for the children right now as they are in their homes. And we are using the various platforms to continue with education. We will talk a bit more about the various platforms a little later. I would just like to share a comment from Willocks. Thank you for joining the conversation. Wilopo says we need to anticipate change, monitor change, as well as adapt to change quickly. If you don't change, you'll become extinct. Thank you very much for that insight. So the issue of adapting is quite critical in this season. Thank you very much for that contribution. I would like to acknowledge Mr. Alfred Okello, who has managed to join us. Welcome, Alfred.
Thank you very much, Shingi.
Thank you for joining. It's a learning process for everyone. Things to do with connectivity are an issue, but we press on, we adapt. I would like to invite Mr. Abdi at this point to just also give a reaction on the issue that we are discussing, on what the priority is at the moment, the issue with adapting to change. Please go ahead, Abdi.
Thank you very much, Shingi. We have an African proverb that says, by the time the fool has learnt the game, the players have dispersed. So if we wait, we might find ourselves as the only players and the only spectators while the match has ended. So it's very important that we take leadership. You know, being a school leader means that there is a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. The public is waiting for you to take an action. We should not look at it as a government initiative. What is the government doing? The government has so much on its plate. So that if we all say that we will wait for the government to do, we are forgetting that we are part of the government. So the simple steps that we take at individual levels are what will change and help us cope. Sometimes the government needs our steps, the individual steps that we are taking. Then they see it working and they join forces with you to make it a reality. So for the school leaders, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to showcase our creativity, our critical thinking abilities, and our leadership, because this is the time when we are needed most. We want to prove to the world that education is not confined to the four walls of the classroom. We want to prove that learning goes beyond the school compound. We want to confirm that quarantine is only for the people, not for the minds. That we can allow our students to learn and we can provide an opportunity. So I think the first step as a school leader, one of the things that we should be working on is to inspire hope. We need to inspire hope that things will come back to normal. There are many people who are losing hope. So that's the first change. If we were not thinking about that, we should forget thinking about the grades that the students will get. Let's think about how are we going to normalize this? Or how are we going to cope with this new different? Because we are now not talking about a new normal anymore. It might be a new different. We might be starting afresh. And we have very many opportunities to grow out of this. So the initiatives that we take at individual levels, like ensuring that our students are learning by talking to them, it starts from a very simple thing. It might be a phone call to know how the students are doing and what it is that they need. So if you're working in an individual, you're working in a rural setting, you might talk about talking to those students and providing an opportunity where they can access some of the learning materials. They must not necessarily sit there and learn. They can take the materials and use them for learning. So that might be a simple initiative. If you are in an area where you can use technology, then you can move towards technology, which we shall also share in the meantime. Thank you, Shingi.
Thank you very much, Abdi, for those comments. You have said right now the head teacher has a role of inspiring hope to the learning community, to their students, to their teachers. And the question is, how do we cope with the new different? That's very interesting. It's no longer the new normal, but it's the new different. And you have talked about it not just being a government initiative, but that there are simple steps. They don't have to be complicated. That will show showcase the creativity as well as the critical thinking abilities of the head teacher. I really like the statement where you said quarantine is for the people and not the minds. And I think that resonates with what Mr. Mubiru shared earlier on. I would just like to acknowledge all those who are coming through on our Facebook platform and sharing their thoughts. Irene is saying, yes, indeed, our individual initiative is key. And she is also saying that when change comes, the first step is to accept it and jump into looking for ways to find or fitting in the circumstances. Thank you very much for your contributions. Please continue to share your thoughts, your ideas, and contribute to this conversation. It is for you. Moving on, would like to now look at the learning and what is actually happening at a practical level right now. The children are in their homes, and there are various platforms that schools are using to continue with education. Would you like to share your experiences, what is happening in your schools or around you in your community, other schools? What has been working? What is not working? Over to you, Mr. Mubiru.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Shingai. And thank you, our audience. It is refreshing to learn that people are with us and are following and giving us those nice comments. Before I get to what my personal experience is about the learning as it stands now, I would like to draw your attention, the attention of everybody, that just yesterday in the papers here, there were the SOPs, standard operating procedures, purportedly issued by the Ministry of Health in an attempt to make readiness for reopening of schools. Because what is stuck in our mind and what we think must be is the ideal is that children should go back to school. Now, when these SOPs were looked at, and one of them was proposing that a classroom, a normal classroom, is going to accommodate between 10 and 15 students, learners. And it raised a lot of issues. And there was a debate going on one of our forums. I'll quote what one head teacher wrote. I'm not mentioning the name. But after discussing the cost of going back to school with those SOPs in place and what came to people's minds, this head teacher said, for me, I'm okay with any figure as long as children are back in school. We are losing them. They are losing their entire future. That statement alone shows you the feelings of the school leaders. They are aware that if the children are not kept in line with their education, we are losing them. They are losing their future. And if I may add, if the children lose their future, the nation loses its future. So it is critical now. So what we need to do is to embrace what is happening and embrace it now. As we speak, like I earlier mentioned, we have mediums of trying to keep children learning. The very first one that was issued, that was sponsored by government, was to use the National Curriculum Development Center to get materials, homeschooling materials, which were printed, and the printed ones were intended to target those people who cannot access radio and who cannot access television. So as a national response, it was those materials. And earlier on, before we knew that this thing is going to stretch for much longer than anticipated, it was revision of what had already been covered. Now, as the time is stretching and the anxieties are becoming greater and greater, right now, the National Development Curriculum Center and government, I think, are planning to make other materials that will continue from where the others stopped. Now, in the urban areas, most schools are using direct approaches. But let me get a little personal here. I have a candidate, a P7 candidate here in my home. And somehow, because we live in an urban setting, the school has been able to send materials. And when the child sees that this material has been signed by my teacher, it makes them become hopeful. It makes them know that learning is taking place in a different way, but my teacher cares about me. Why am I bringing this example? I'm bringing it into hammering the fact that we as school leaders must play the frontline role. Because if we reached our parents in however simple way it might be. Even if it was an SMS, short messaging, message, an SMS on telephone, on a simple telephone, doesn't have to be a smartphone. And tell them, at the end of all this, our children must come back to school. I hope you are taking very good care of our children as you are at home. Did you manage to get the materials? Because the fact is that sometimes our children, our students are very many in the homes that we cannot reach, like physically, but we can continue to give hope to the learners and the parents. So right now, this is what is happening. The challenge is that learning has been tagged to examinations. And when you hear many people worried about what is taking place, they are wondering now, will the candidates do exams? Will everybody do this exam or the other? So my take on this is that in this crisis time, let us focus on the most important need as far as education is concerned, to prevent dropout because of this crisis. So let us find a way of keeping our learners' minds focused on education in one way or the other. Shingi?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mubiru. I think you've touched on quite a lot of interesting issues. The important role of the teacher to show the students that they care. So that communication and keeping in touch with their students keeps the students motivated. You've also talked about preventing the dropout rate from going high amongst the children, keeping their minds connected. And an interesting point that you talked about was the concern with exams, that most people, whether it's parents or its schools or its education systems, are saying, what about the exams? But education is more than just exams. And one of the key agendas right now is to keep the students' minds active, motivated, and connected, as well as inspired. I would like to invite Ishmael Abdi to what's your take on that?
Thank you very much, moderator. When we talk about methodologies that we can use at this time, we have two that we currently talk about: synchronous and asynchronous ways of educating. When we talk of synchronous, we are saying that we are having all the learners and the teachers working at the same time, but they are in different places. Like what we are currently doing, this is synchronous. We are all here working together. We are in different places in our various houses, in our various rooms, in our various offices, but we are working together and we are doing the same thing together. That is an option. But this option is only available to those with technology and with the technical know-how. It's also available to those who have electricity and access to power. It's also available to those who have network coverage. So it might not be available to a bigger population. So if we look at what is the percentage of our learners who can access synchronous learning, it becomes a bit of a challenge. Then we have the second one, which is asynchronous, where we are learning at different places at different times. So it is more of self-paced learning, where we are learning whatever content we are learning from our different homes, from our different little cocoons. What I want to mention is there are so many initiatives that have been taken. I don't want to discount any of the initiatives. Each initiative comes with its own challenges and comes with its own positivity. The most important is if a child is missing out on one initiative that has been put, the child might get an opportunity through another initiative. We have the national televisions that are broadcasting lessons, and we have the radio programs at the national level that are broadcasting lessons. These are good initiatives. They will assist a number of the learners at home. But we will ask ourselves, what is the percentage? In Kenya, we talk about 47% of the children are able to access the national radio, which means we have 53% who are not able to access the radio. That is a big number. Even 1% is a big number, because we are talking of lives here. 1%, this is a child, and that child matters. So it is important that we look at that, and that is why I said it is important for us as school leaders to start our own initiatives. I'll give a few examples of initiatives that we've taken at personal levels, both in our schools and in schools that I know. One is the postal model that we talk about, where you make copies of weekly assignments and you deliver them to the students. You leave them with the school watchman, you leave them at the school gatekeeper. The students pass there, they collect, and they go with them, and they go and work on them. Because of the issues of COVID-19, and we don't want to exchange a lot of things, they only collect, but they don't submit back. So in case they have challenges, they can now call the teacher, or they can come back to the institution and leave a note about the various challenges that they have faced while they are working on that. That is a very rudimentary way, but it is working for some kids. So we are looking at this child who is hard to reach, because the child does not have a phone. The child's parents do not have access to internet, and the child has to continue learning. You provide an opportunity for them to come and collect. The same with the distribution of books, where we allow them to come and collect the specific books it is signed for, and they get them. Then we have the challenge with this is that not every school will afford that. There are those who will find it hard to have somebody always going there printing some of these materials, printing the materials for the kids. Another one is school-based WhatsApp sessions. They form WhatsApp group for the various students, and then the teachers now post assignments there and interact with the learners on the WhatsApp, where the learners are learning and they are sharing what it is that they are learning. We also have, I will still talk about the asynchronous, and then I go back to the synchronous. We also have home-based schooling. There is a school leader who decided to work with his teachers in a very interesting way. He decided that he will pilot a project where one teacher will visit 5 homesteads, and then he will have 2 visits per week, just to check on the well-being of the learners and to assure them and to tell them to continue with their studies. So these teachers are moving around, going to the various homesteads, at least attend to 5 homesteads and talk to the kids. The reach is school specific. So you see, this is an initiative by the teacher, and it is the children of that school who are benefiting. But it doesn't mean that if I go to that particular homestead and I find children from other schools who are there, I will not talk to them. That is a personal initiative by a teacher. And that is what leadership comes up with. Another way that we've seen at the national level happening is the newspapers coming in to assist, where the newspapers are now putting in bits of information about school, revision materials within the papers that they are selling. This comes in as supplement. And when you are buying the newspaper, you can get this material. So for the areas that can access the newspapers and for the parents who can afford the newspapers, then it is easy for them. We also have the socially distanced group discussions. In the informal settlements, where we have quite a number of children who cannot afford some of this technology and all that, they have decided that we are going to learn in groups of 5 or 10. They look at the government regulations. They say not more than 15 people, and they say, okay, let's pick our 15. These 15 are going to this church. We will sit separately, but we will talk to each other. Because even on the streets, we are more than 15. Even on the roads, in the markets, we are more than 10. So it means we can still, if the shops can continue working and then we can meet the 10 of us in a mosque, in a church, and we can discuss, but we ensure that we maintain the safety regulations. These have been done by that. We also have a situation where some families have decided to ask teachers and university students to come in and support, where a university student now says, it is my initiative. And this is something that I have personally done. Talk to a few university students within the area and ask them, can you take leadership and support kids in that particular homestead or the areas that you are living in? What is it?
Okay, we seem to have lost Abdi there. I'm sure he'll be able to join in. He has given us quite a lot of interesting insights on how he is managing in his community in Samburu, Kenya, which is actually a rural community. And it is our hope that you are getting some practical skills or practical ideas on how you can continue to support teaching and learning processes within your communities. It looks like Alfred has managed to join us again. Welcome, Alfred.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Finally.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if you have been following the discussion so far. Have you managed to follow the discussion?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did to some point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. We will give Abdi 2 more minutes to finish off sharing, and then we'll move to Alfred. Please continue, Abdi. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you. So I mentioned the issue of what we do at those personal levels. Then on the synchronous way, where we are talking of same place, different, same time, different places, we have Zoom sessions that have been taking place. We have Teams sessions that have been taking place, where a teacher is teaching a number of students across the country without necessarily asking where this child is coming from, because technology has no borders. It does not have a school ID. So we open up for all the kids who are able to access. And I have seen these working very well with a number of STEM-based teachers have come in and they are sharing their timetables weekly for students to learn mathematics and sciences and all these subjects. Currently, we are training teachers on the same. How do you use technology? Giving them basic knowledge and tips on how to use technology to reach people, because they are the ones who have the content. If they know how to pass the content, then it will be very easy for everyone. I will wish to stop at that so that I provide my colleagues an opportunity to share too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your approaches. And in your context, I think there's a lot to take from there, a lot to glean. And I just wanted to touch on the last point that you mentioned, where you said technology actually has no borders. So basically, you're saying it's no longer about me and my school, but it's about education as a whole. And as school leaders, as teachers, we need to be coming together, despite, irrespective rather, of the school that you are coming from, and ensuring that children are continuing to learn in their context. I think that's a very, very powerful thing, that, children are able to connect no matter which school they are from. The issue is are they a child, and are they supposed to be learning in this season where schools are closed? And as a teacher, you continue to provide even for those who are not necessarily your own. So I think that's why earlier on, as Mr. Mubiru said, it's a calling. I would like now to invite Alfred Okello. While we still have him, I hope we'll have you for a longer time now. What are your views in terms of managing change, particularly looking at making sure that the teaching and learning process continues?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shingi. Thank you, my colleagues, Abdi and Abdi, and indeed the entire audience. I would like to look at the aspect of managing change from the perspective of the Sustainable Development Goal number 4. SDG 4 states very, very clearly that we've got to ensure provision of inclusive and equitable quality education, and of course also avail opportunities for lifelong learning to all. And from what I see, we are actually compelled to do all that we are doing based on that goal. While the learners are at school, as we've always been, doing, we ensure quality teaching and, of course, quality learning. We make sure that the teachers do their part, the leaders do their part, the learners, of course, do the learning as well, and the parents facilitate the learning of their children. But we are now saying that with the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic, this still has to continue. Because when you look at that goal, it talks about provision of inclusive education. So inclusive education should not be restricted within the walls of the classroom. It talks about quality education. It talks about equitable education. It talks about provision of opportunities for lifelong learning. Now, all these do not necessarily have to take place only in the classroom. And I think this is a point that we need to emphasize. So now that our learners are not at school, it does not mean the goal is irrelevant. The goal continues to be relevant. In other words, our learners need to continue learning. They need to be given quality learning. They need to be enabled to learn. They need to be included in the learning process. They need to be given opportunity to learn forever and ever in their lifetime. So what we have been doing in the classroom has now been shifted to a totally different context, and that is, the home and the community. So the challenge now is, do we do it the same way we've been doing in class? Do we do our teaching the same way we've been teaching in the classroom? Do we do the facilitation in the same way? Do the leaders act in the same way to support learning of the learners like they've been doing when they're in the classroom? We are saying because of the change in the context, certain things have got to change. And that's why we are talking about change management. So we are shifting away from the provision of the quality education that we all desire from within the walls of the classroom to a different context in our homes, in the community. And that is what, as leaders, we should be able to visualize very seriously. Now that this quality learning should take place in homes, in the community, how do we facilitate it? And that is why I really would like to appreciate my colleagues. They brought out quite a number of things which we as school leaders should be able to do in a new context. And by so doing, we'll be managing the change. So the kind of teaching and learning which is now taking place is around what we call homeschooling. So as leaders, what is the concept of school learning? How do we understand it? How do we facilitate homeschooling, which is now taking place in a totally different context? And I think that is the main challenge that we as leaders face. Are we in touch, for example, with the learners to ensure that they are learning effectively and they are receiving quality learning? Are we in touch with the teachers to ensure that they are supporting the learners so that they can learn, they continue learning the same way or even better? The same with the parents. So school leaders like us are really at the core of the entire thing. We are at the core of the change management. We have to be able to support each and every other stakeholders to ensure that what has been happening in our classrooms, in our schools, continue happening, and even in a better fashion when our learners are at home. One great advantage, and I think is an opportunity that we need to take advantage of as leaders, is that since learning has been moved out of the classroom and has now been taken outside, it becomes more practical. It becomes more experiential. The learning becomes more relevant. Even the parents and the community begin to see that learning can actually be related to what is done at home. So for me, I think this is an opportunity so that the learning that we are talking about becomes relevant to all the stakeholders and ultimately to the community, and it makes a difference in our lives. So as leaders, we have to support every category of stakeholders to ensure that they do their part so that we continue having this effective learning taking place at home. I'd like to appreciate in Uganda the Ministry of Education and Sports for championing supporting our learners so that they continue learning while at home. There are 3-4 things which are fundamental, which have been done by our Ministry of Education and Sports. One of them is coming up with a framework of ensuring continuity of learning during this lockdown. That alone speaks volumes. That framework is very, very supportive, within which we are focusing on basically 3 things. We are looking at how we can continue learning, have learning continue at home. Then the second thing is we are also at the same time preparing for reopening of schools because, at some point our learners are going to come back to school. Then thirdly, we are also ensuring that when they come back at school, the context in the school will have also changed from what it has been before. So despite that, learning will still have to continue at school in a different context from what we had before the lockdown. So we are appreciative to the Ministry of Education and Sports for doing all this. It has guided us. Now, the Ministry of Education and Sports went ahead and provided the self-study materials, which have been distributed. Yes, it's true that maybe not all the learners have been able to access them, but a lot of effort has been made to ensure that the majority of them, and I think the program is still going on. So these self-study materials are very, very important, whereby the learners are able to learn at their own pace. And it is what we would refer to as, asynchronous approach to learning. The learners learn at their own pace and they relate whatever they're learning to the environment at home and in the community, thus making their learning practical, which is really very good. 2, we have the use of televisions and the use of radios. These also are helping. These are what you could call the actually interactive synchronous approaches. Now, these are also being used side by side with the study materials. In fact, the other day someone was asking, which one is better than the other? I think what I would say is that all these approaches are important. They have to complement each other. We need the TVs to be on, we need the radios, and we need the self-study materials so that the learners have a variety of media from which they can choose, and they can use this to complement each other so that they have effective learning. So these are some of the things that government has done. So as school leaders, our role is now to support that, to ensure the study materials reach the learners, and when they reach the learners, they make use of them effectively. To support the teachers so that they can participate in the television programs, the TV programs, the radio programs, so that, they can, as Abdi was saying, be able to teach our learners, irrespective of which schools they're coming from. Now, we think if these are done, we should be able to have effective learning taking place in our homes and in the entire community. And for me, I think what is important, dear viewers and listeners, perhaps at the beginning we thought this program was not going to work, of homeschooling. But I want to say, and I want to quote from the late Mzee Nelson Mandela, that it always seems impossible until it's done. Perhaps the majority of the people, almost all, thought that homeschooling would not take place. But I want to assure everyone that we are moving there. We may be moving slowly, but very, very surely, I am sure by the end of the day, we should be having effective homeschooling taking place in our homes for the benefit of our children and the learners. I think for now, I can stop there for the moment. Thank you so much. And back to you, Shingi.
Thank you, Alfred, for that contribution. There was so much to glean on from there. And I'm just thinking in my mind, in terms of beyond COVID, when schools have opened, are things really going to be the same? With the online platforms and the multimedia type of learning, could it be that for some children, actually, this is a blessing for them? That it has worked out better for them than a traditional classroom. Just looking at the abilities of different children. You mentioned the issue of learning at their own pace, learning in their environments, and practical learning as well in the homes. This is just a question I'm thinking to myself. Could it be that the issue of homeschooling, although in some countries, it had started to gain traction, it's going to become maybe a bigger phenomenon even after things have gone back to the new different and schools have opened. But one key issue that keeps coming up as I check with our comments is the issue of the parents and the role of the parents. As a parent myself, a lot has been expected of me in this season while I'm trying to work, my usual 8 to 5. I have to monitor the children and make sure that they are doing the tasks that the teachers have sent. I'm communicating with the headmasters and, a lot is going on. I would just like to hear your comments on, your expectation in terms of the role of teachers, of parents rather, and how are you coping with that? How are your teachers coping with that? Because there's a lot going on in this ecosystem as we all try to ensure that learning continues, education continues.
Yes, thank you very much, Shingi. You touch on a very interesting aspect of what we are all observing now. In the past, when things were still normal, and that was before COVID-19 pandemic, there were a lot of things which we would see and appreciate and wish were in place. We would actually emphasize them. For example, like in Uganda, every school has got parents, teachers as the three categories of stakeholders, the two, parents and teachers coming together. And one of the things that we used to emphasize to the parents was their roles and responsibilities in the education of their children. But because these children would spend much more time in school with the teachers, a lot of parents would, take this for granted, would perhaps say, well, I think these teachers are just trying to evade their responsibility. So a lot of parents would not take it seriously, to the extent that they would still leave the children in the hands of the teachers throughout. But now you can see that the reality has finally come. And for us as leaders and as teachers, this is an opportunity for the parents to be reawakened, for the eyes of the parents to open, so that they know that they are actually at the center of provision of education to their children. They have a big role. So we are taking this very positively. So parents are beginning to realize that they have a big role to play. So we are very appreciative of that. Secondly, we also think that in the past, there's been a lot of assumption that learning only takes place at school and within the walls of the classroom. But now everyone is beginning to see that learning can actually take place out there. To the extent that I want to agree with you, Shingi, that the homeschooling has started and is progressing very well, I'm sure, around the world. And there's no doubt that even after COVID-19 pandemic, it's going to continue. Look at the technology. We wouldn't be here discussing this on, using this technology. Perhaps we wouldn't, but because of that, we have been able to. So integration of technology in our education systems and in our schools is also going to be a normal thing, even after the pandemic. So there are positive aspects that COVID-19 has come along with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfred. There are a lot who are agreeing with you. And as parents, we are being told that we have not been playing our role. And in this season, we have been forced to take responsibility for our children's education. Another comment has also suggested that because some parents are now home and in some instances have been made redundant, they do not have a choice. But perhaps going forward, there is a way that schools could think of really ensuring that parents continue to be a significant part of the learning process for their children. As we wind up the discussion, I would like to invite Abdi and Abi to give us their final thoughts on any of the issues that we have discussed, and we will continue to take a few more comments from our viewers before we actually close. So over to you, Abi, and then we can have Abdi.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you very much, colleagues. Alfred and Abdulkader, Ismail. As always, anything that comes up, every cloud really has a silver lining. COVID-19 has ushered us into the 21st century approaches to learning. In a rude way, yes, but this is what has happened. It has emphasized the issue of collaboration between the stakeholders to education. You can hear we are speaking more about the parents, we are speaking more about the community, and in places where, like in rural settings, where the children, maybe from one school or many schools around there, are close together, they are learning together. Collaboration is much more than it was when we are going to schools. Technology, like Alfred has alluded to, has been ushered in. You can hear now the school leader now, from whatever context, must begin to think about taking the steps towards embracing the new approaches to learning. Creativity, creativity in learning, change, the shift from the traditional teacher as the sage, the owner of the knowledge, to the teacher and maybe any other adult as a guide to learning. Issues of lifelong learning that really means a lot in our lives. So because we must conclude, this is a very exciting topic. I would like to invite the school leaders who are part of our audience to begin to think about what they must do to position themselves strategically to bear the vision, as it were, because school leaders are the vision bearers, to begin to think creatively what must be done about the learning of the children in this new normal, because I'm very sure we are not going back to what has been. Thank you very much for the opportunity. May God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Abby, for those inspiring words to our head teachers. I would like now to invite Abdi Ishmael. Just a reminder, Abdi has joined us from Kenya, the beauty of technology. And Abdi, I realized that we didn't ask you to give us, just an understanding of your context. You are in a rural area, and you had a school there. So as you give your final remarks, may I invite you to just tell us a bit about your context. The reason why is there are comments that are coming through about how parents in the rural areas need to wake up, as someone has said on the platform, and how they need to be more involved as well in the education of their children. And you have shared so many practical things that you have done, but I just wanted our audience to understand that you are actually in a rural setting. So your final remarks.
Thank you very much, Shingi. The rural setting is the reality of how our education is in the world. 85% of children in sub-Saharan Africa are not learning, according to UNESCO. And they call this learning crisis. And majority of these kids are in the rural areas because we depend on the rural areas for most things, but we look at them in a different way. My situation in the rural area is, I believe the fact that the parents do not have the knowledge and might not even appreciate so much about what education is because of the cultures and various ways in which they have lived all along. And the fact that they want quick gains, yet education is asking for long-term investment, and they are used to short-term investments and gains. Sometimes it makes us think that they are not able to work with. One thing I've realized is that if you engage them, they work. As a school leader, I have worked with parents, some who cannot even understand the language that we use in school, the basic language of instruction. In Kenya, we use Swahili and English, so they might not even be able to speak in Swahili. But when we meet with them, we get a translator, we get somebody to talk to them, we sit with them when they are talking about their own children. We realize that all they need is information. They didn't know what is expected of them. And they are depending on their children to tell them what is expected of them. So we take the extra step of talking to them and making them appreciate that it is important for them to invest in their children's learning because we are investing for the purpose of the whole community. So the moment we develop two things, we develop authorship in whatever programs and interventions we are bringing, they become part of the authors of the solution. So long as they are in the authorship, they will participate in the ownership. It's very easy. So these things work together. If they are involved, they will come in. Some of the little interventions that we've tried, I'll give a practical example of how you can even do practicals at this particular time with your children, yet they are at home. Because I operate in a school that does not have a science laboratory, and I have presented students for examinations because it's a small school and it had a number of challenges. The teacher knows how to do the practical. So the teacher records the practical on phone to teachers and explains step-by-step procedures using
I think we've had another technological issue there.
Sorry,
Okay.
So
please go ahead.
Step by step, they record and explain everything. And then we sit down, edit it, and
Okay.
phones. And these kids will watch.
It looks like Abdi's connectivity is playing up there. But while we wait for him to come back, I would like to invite Alfred Okello for your final comments. Okay. Before you go on, Alfred, Abdi, we had lost you. Can you just wind up?
Sorry about that. Technology has decided to take care of the rural area. Now, we should take advantage of the COVID-19 as my closing remarks. As school leaders, there is a lot that we are learning out of this. This is a crisis, and there might be other crises that might come. It might not affect the whole country, it might affect your school alone. What will you do? It is time for us to start thinking about what other initiatives, what other plans do I have? And I think also to the government, we need to change our policies. We need to think about how we can work. The universities and the colleges, and I appreciate some of the comments that I've seen on universities and colleges, they need to change the way they are training their students. I know when we go back to school, none of my teachers, and I can say this because I know it is live, I can be quoted 100 years from now. None of my teachers will tell me that they are going to get a substitute teacher for their lesson because they have taken students out for games. They have to use this technology we are using to ensure that they deliver, because it is possible. We've seen it happening now. It can happen even at that time. So it is our own initiative, our school principals, but I'm not saying that we should force things on the teachers. Let us guide them. Let us push them towards embracing technology. Let us show them how it is possible to use it. Let us show the students that they can learn using the social media that they love, that Facebook is not only for snaps and telling people what it is you are eating and where you are seated today and where you have visited, but you can learn from it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much, Abdi. It has been really great hearing the Kenya experience. Over to you, Alfred, for your final remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shingi. Finally, just two key things that I would like to leave with our viewers and listeners, and especially the school leaders. One, we have to be aware that we are going to be having successive changes. We are now in the first phase of the changes that we are going to be having continuously for a while, where we are moving away from supporting teaching and learning in our schools to supporting homeschooling, that is teaching and learning in homes and in the community. So we have to be able to manage that change smoothly so that the homeschooling that we are talking about every time is effective. Then there will be another stage of change. When our schools reopen, the learners are going to come back to the schools. But like I said earlier on, the context of our schools has changed. So the schools are no longer going to be like they were before the lockdown started. So again, in the same way, our school leaders should be ready for that. So we need to be thinking very seriously about, first of all, how we are preparing to receive the learners. And secondly, and more importantly, how we are going to sustain the learners in school while ensuring that effective teaching and learning takes place. So we also have to be very mindful of that. Secondly, and lastly, we need to know, like Abdi has said about technology, we also need to know that homeschooling has come to stay. Even when things normalize in future, homeschooling is going to be commonplace. So as school leaders, we need to prepare ourselves for this so that we do our best and learners learn continuously. I thank you very, very much for listening to me. I thank you, Shingi, and my colleagues. Thank you. Over to you, Shingi.
Thank you very much, Abi, Mbiru, Alfred Okello, and Abdidaka Ishmael. I hope you'll agree with me, viewers, that this was a very rich conversation, looking at the different aspects of it concerning change in education and the role of the head teacher in managing this change. We have been encouraged to prepare for this change as the possibility of schools reopening is on the horizon. What are the things that we'll take forward with us, and what are those that we are going to leave? As definitely, I think the general agreement is that the education terrain is not going to be the same when we reopen. And there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done in terms of how we will incorporate what this season has taught us. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for your comments and your contributions. Please continue contributing. We will take a look at your comments. We have enjoyed having you on this platform. Please look forward to the next series, which we will advise you on this page. So we haven't finished our series on supporting head teachers in times of crisis. We do look forward to being with you again. Thank you, and good morning. Thank you, my panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shingi.